and welcome. I'm Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders, and I'll be moderating our discussion today to mark the launch, the Malta launch of this brilliant children's book, Fearless, the story of Daphne Caruana Galizia. So I'm joined this evening by a brilliant panel, including Matthew Caruana Galizia, Daphne's eldest son, who is now running the Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation. Just to note, Matthew does not have video, but he will be joining us by audio, so please listen out for him. Caroline Muscat is a Maltese award-winning investigative journalist and the founder of The Shift News, which is an online investigative news portal based in Malta. And I want to note as well that Matthew and Caroline are both laureates of Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Prize. Elli Narewska is a digital program manager for NewsWise, an award-winning news literacy program in the UK from the Guardian Foundation, National Literacy Trust, and PSHE Association. Juliet Rix is an award-winning British journalist and author of books for adults and children. And Gattaldo, the author of this book, is an award-winning creative director and illustrator. Fearless, the story of Daphne Caruana Galizia, is Gattaldo's first children's picture book. So we're so pleased to be joined by this group this evening, and to mark just yesterday's anniversary. Yesterday marked 3 years, of course, since the horrific assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta. But this book is a different way of telling Daphne's story, and that's what our conversation will focus on here tonight. I think I'll go to Gattaldo first, really to ask how this book came about, what inspired it, and what inspired you to tell it in this way and to aim it at children.
Well, it was my niece. She has to take all the credit. She asked me a question about my friend who she had heard about us, the adults talking about. And I tried to explain to her and my nephew, her brother, I tried to explain what Daphne meant to me and what her journalism meant to Malta. And of course, when you're talking to children, you find that you have to simplify things, etc. And I thought, when I went back to London, I thought I'll just start experimenting with a little story of her life, and that helped. And from there, I went. I had friends who started saying, "Well, why don't you propose it, etc." And that's how I approached Amnesty first.
So can I ask you a bit, though? Let's take it a few steps back. Can I ask about your own relationship with Daphne, which also was a source of inspiration for this story? Is that right?
It was, in as much as I wanted to do something, partly selfishly for myself, in terms of I was going through the grief of as other friends, I suppose, and family were going through, and I wanted to do something to actually that would tell her story. And well, other people had written something, etc., and I thought there was nothing for children, and that's how I started writing that.
Matthew, if I could bring you in, what has this story meant for your family? And can you comment a bit about how you'll be able to take it forward and sort of use it as part of the campaign for justice for your mother?
One of the things that we haven't really been able to do over the past 3 years is explain how my mother touched people's lives and what she was like as a person, simply because we were so busy with the campaign for justice itself, fighting for justice for the corruption that my mother was investigating, making sure that the perpetrators of her assassination were brought to justice, making sure that the investigation was being conducted properly, that we didn't really have the opportunity to tell this story. And I'm really glad that people like Aldo have taken that up and have told the story from their perspective, so that people aren't hearing it only from me and my brothers and the rest of my family. And they're really hearing firsthand how my mother touched people's lives, including Aldo's.
In fact, it is that legacy that really this book hopes to tell to this new audience. Could you tell us a bit about what you see as your mother's legacy?
Me? I mean, it's very difficult to just sum it up, because there were so many different sides to her personality. Most people internationally see the anti-corruption crime fighter, kind of, which is a big part of what she was. But she had a long legacy of journalism in Malta that Aldo illustrates really well in the book, going back to the late 80s and early 90s, where she really broke the mold, not just for a journalist in Malta, but also for women in general in Malta. And I think it's really important that that story is told.
And of course, what happened to your mother, as we often talk about at Reporters Without Borders, didn't occur in a vacuum. When we look at the broader state of journalism and press freedom in Malta, there are a lot of concerns that remain. I'll bring in Caroline Muscat now, because when we think about this fearless kind of quality of Daphne, the first person that comes to my mind now in continuing that in Malta is Caroline. Now, Caroline launched the Shift News just weeks after Daphne's assassination in 2017. Caroline, could you talk to us a bit about what that's been like, and the climate that you're currently working in, what it is like now to carry on this sort of fearless journalism in Malta today?
Courage is not the lack. It is about going forward despite all the threats and that you face. The Shift was launched 3 weeks after Daphne's death, because we felt that we needed to send a message back to the perpetrators that you can't silence the story, you can't do this to one of us. It is not only the Shift that is continuing her work. There has been an international effort by journalists from different European countries to continue the investigations that she started, one of which was an investigation that apparently led to her death. The situation has not become easier in the last 3 years, because as findings, as our investigations have moved forward, increasingly we find government links to her assassination. So the challenges are massive, whether they're online threats or just harassment, or legal challenges, slap lawsuits, or all this makes the life of every journalist very difficult. But I think one of the positives that has come out of this situation is a civil society in Malta that has emerged. The courage by journalists, even if it's a handful of journalists who continue her work. All of this is only a very small part of her legacy. Daphne she's often seen as the journalist. Daphne was a person, a beautiful person, and all that she left behind is actually quite a very positive message for the future. So this is, I think, is a very positive legacy.
Do you feel the book captures that in a way that will make sense to the next generation?
I think because we are so involved in getting results, in getting justice, that the book by Aldo is really beautiful in terms of reminding us that for something like this not to happen again, we need to think of future generations, and it's done so beautifully. The message is perfect, and it's a really beautiful addition to the struggle that we are currently going through.
I'll come next to Juliet on that same issue, but just to note as well for the audience, we're hoping to take at least a few questions from the audience. So if you want to type anything into the box at the bottom of this, we should be able to see that, and I'll try to bring those in a little bit later. Juliet, why do you feel it's important for children to know about Daphne and about journalism?
If you look around us, you can see that we've got a few problems with fake news, and we need the next generation to grow up valuing honest journalism and also understanding that there isn't always honesty in everything that's said, and being able to begin to judge between fact and fake fact. They need to be aware of this stuff. It's incredibly important. They need to know that our democracies depend on freedom of expression, freedom of the press. And if you can plant that, if you can introduce that idea at a young age, then you're giving them a foundation on which to build. And you're allowing people to discuss this. A book like this is allowing a way in to an awkward subject, a way in to talk about this sort of thing with the very young. And I mean, it's useful anywhere, but in Malta, particularly useful because, as Gattaldo was saying, that he got questions from his niece that prompted this book, and children in Malta are going to come across this clearly. And so a way of talking about it, a way of opening up a discussion that can then be age appropriate according to the child and according to what the parent thinks the child is ready for, has got to be incredibly useful.
As a mother, I have to say I agree. And my own children, of course, not based in Malta, have known about Daphne's case because I tried to speak to them as honestly as I can about my own work. They enjoyed the book, so it's been tested on my 3. And as well, the launch website that goes along with this, because Gattaldo, you set up a beautiful set of articles about different areas of this that children, slightly older children, I think, can really get stuck into. So even I worked on one about what is a journalist and why must we protect them. I think it's very interesting as a parent and as a press freedom campaigner to go through that exercise of what's appropriate and how we tell that. Elli, if I could bring you in on that, how would you say, from NewsWise's perspective, how you found to be what is a good approach in discussing these sorts of difficult issues with children?
I think I agree with what both you and Juliet have said about the importance of introducing young children to these ideas and the fact that children are aware of these big news stories, so they have responses to them, they have feelings about them, and what's important is that they have a safe space to be able to explore those ideas, and also the idea of the importance of reporting on these stories and the fact that people have access to important information in their lives. So just the very idea of news is really important. I think when it comes to sort of safely discussing potentially traumatic stories with children, obviously you do need to be really aware of what you're doing, but what you don't want to encourage is that children don't feel like they're supposed to talk about these sorts of issues. And we have lots of advice that we have for teachers and parents about ways that you can go about this. So always being aware of if you're talking to a whole class of children, what stories might be appropriate for one class might not be appropriate for another, because each group of children is going to have different experiences, to make sure that there are ground rules about respecting other people's opinions. If people have questions, maybe they don't feel comfortable asking questions in front of everybody else. So having a way of doing that people can do that anonymously, maybe writing questions down so that you can have time to look at them yourself and compose an answer to it, but also that they don't have to ask those questions in front of everybody else. So there are different things that you can do to approach stories that are more serious and more difficult. But what we found is that the big serious stories are actually the ones that get children most engaged. We do talk about animal stories and space stories and those sort of fun stories as well, and there's definitely a place for that. But big social issue stories are the ones where they really get their teeth into them. And as I'm sure anyone who works with or has children is really aware, they've got a very well-developed sense of social justice or justice itself. They're really, really hyper aware of when someone's not being treated fairly. And so those sorts of stories really, really engage children.
Oh, absolutely. As a mother, I have to say the first time I mentioned Daphne's case to my children, probably very soon thereafter, because I was campaigning so actively, the first thing they asked me is, well, who did it? And have they been arrested? Or are they going to prison? And they know that that's what we're still working on. Juliet, could I bring you in on that same question in your approach with your own books? How do you see this approach in terms of broaching these difficult issues with children?
Well, I wrote a book called Travels with My Granny, which is a way of, well, I mean, it's a fun book about travel all around the world first. And that's kind of the point. It also allows you a very simple, very positive way of introducing the idea of dementia to young children. And so it's a similar idea in that you're giving the children something that's actually quite simple, quite universal, doesn't deal necessarily very directly with the worst of the issue, but allows a way of opening up discussion, a way of kids beginning to understand. I mean, the point in my Travels with My Granny is that the grandchild says that the grown-ups don't think Granny's confused and doesn't know where she is. I think she knows exactly where she is. It just isn't where the grown-ups are. So it's all about traveling in your head. And that gives you a way of explaining when someone's behaving really strangely. So it sort of opens up a way of talking about it in a way that is not distressing. And I think the same goes for something like Fearless. It's producing something that's quite is readable. It's a nice story. It's not distressing immediately, but it allows for this discussion to be opened up. It allows for a foundation to be laid for kids to begin to understand what it is. And yeah, exactly as Elli was saying, it allows for a beginning and a foundation that you can then build on. And if kids start off with a basic understanding, you're able to build and build and build as they get older, and they will build on it as well. And it allows them to ask questions. It just opens everything up. And I think you can deal with difficult issues, and it's just a question of making sure it's age appropriate and to some extent being led by the child. Once it's out there, the child will pick up different things. And also with children's books, children read and reread. They love to read stories over and over. And as they read them again, they'll see different bits of it and they'll ask different questions, and it'll open the issue up further. And I think that happens with these kind of books that deal with difficult issues in ways that are not too difficult initially.
Well, Gattaldo, could I take that to you actually and ask about your decisions in this particular book and how you decided to set it out in this way, telling Daphne's story and kind of stopping short of what happened to her? Was that a deliberate attempt to fuel that sort of thinking and those questions in children?
It was deliberate, partly because the aim of the book was much more to encourage and to inspire children to appreciate journalism and to appreciate the work of Daphne. It's funny because we interviewed some children, and the first thing, well, I mean, they've obviously read the book with their parents, and the first thing they mention is the assassination. So you kind of like go through it not mentioning it, and the children, that's the first thing that they mention for some reason. And I think it's important in a book to when you talk to children is to say that, to be truthful, and then ask them about their feelings about it, etc. I mean, obviously, this is a book that possibly with some of the children is a book that needs parental guidance, not because it will shock them or anything of the sort, but because they'll have plenty of questions for the parents, as Juliet said.
Absolutely. And just to note again to our audience that if anybody does want to send questions over, I'll keep an eye out for those over the next few minutes. I'd like to maybe probe a bit more on the media literacy area here. Maybe Elli, we could go to you first on that. How really, in the use of books like this and more broadly in sort of how we work with the next generation, how can we instill this sense of how to be critical of information and raise adults that maybe will handle this better than what we're dealing with in the world currently?
I think Gattaldo just touched on it then, because it's all about questioning, really. It's all about encouraging children to be questioning all the time. So we set out a really simple code to stop, question, check, and then decide whenever you encounter some information. So to not immediately believe or react or share something, but to always stop and think about it first and question, where did this come from? Who's written this bit of information? What do they want me to know? And to check whether it's reliable, check whether anyone else is telling you the same information. So to always be questioning things is really, really key to it. And to be aware that, not all information is trustworthy, and to know what to look out for to know when you can trust something, but also to be aware that people are always come from a particular standpoint. So whoever's written it, they will have a set of biases themselves that might influence the way that they're writing, and just to be aware of that will help you to be more critical. So to think who's written this, and are they portraying someone in a certain way? Are they representing everybody who's involved in this story? Is there anyone whose voice is missing out of this story? And just to always have these questions in your mind when you're reading a piece of information, whether it's in a book or whether it's in a newspaper or whether it's on your phone, in all those different situations.
I can't help thinking that a lot of adults would could do with this information as well. I mean, social media is it sort of shows you this happening, because I mean, me included. It's not that I'm not excluding myself from it. Sometimes when something agrees with your preconception of something, then you sort of very easily share it without even looking at, without cross-checking and doing all the stuff that Elli was talking about.
There's a saying in journalism: the more you want to publish, the more times you need to check.
Actually, Matthew, could I bring you in on this? One thing that struck me, even the first time that I met you and your brothers, was that your mother raised very critically minded children. From your own upbringing and your experience as Daphne's son, is there anything that you would say to young people today, in particular young people in Malta, about how to be critical of the information that they consume?
Oh my God, that's a difficult one, because things have changed so much since I was growing up. Back then, I mean, the authorities that we had to challenge were kind of the church and the government and our teachers at school. But now you have, I guess, kind of didactic information or perhaps wrong information coming from other sources that are so difficult to control. Things have changed so much, but I guess my mom gave my brothers and I the kind of tools that we needed to deal with information as it comes to you, and I assume that those are tools which can be kind of used in any situation. So that's the important thing, that your parents do whatever they can to help you develop these mental tools, especially logical thinking, which is a phrase that my mom used a lot in her writing, as opposed to magical thinking, which is what we were taught at Catholic school.
But I would add, sorry, Matthew, that for parents to actually direct their children to the information, for example, that NewsWise has, and also fearlessdaphne.com, where we have such information, etc. And by the way, just let me remind everyone that tomorrow on, well, everyone who lives in Malta, that is, on the Independent on Sunday, there's a supplement which is a journalism aimed at children, basically. So if you'd like to get that'd be quite helpful. And that's been done by myself as Fearless Daphne.
In terms of inspiring the next generation, something I took from the book, but again, I'm a press freedom campaigner, so maybe it wouldn't be interpreted as strongly as such by ordinary people, but it was not just to inspire young minds to be critical, but possibly to inspire some young people into journalism. Was that on your mind at all when you wrote this book, Gattaldo?
Yes, I think we need, as I seem to have said somewhere else, I can't remember, that we need journalists, we need scientists, we need all sorts of people that question things, that and that also do things with passion, like Daphne did. Not for likes, not for money, but for the actual love of what they're doing and for the love of truth.
Caroline, if I could bring you in on that, because you're still spending your life doing this sort of journalism. And I know better than most the price that you've paid for that as well, and the price that you continue to pay, because it's not easy. Would you have anything to say to young people wanting to get into journalism about kind of developing a resilience and sort of anything that would inspire them really to stick with that, because we do need people to continue to get at the truth everywhere?
I think we have a problem in the country in terms of our education system and how we are raised, in the sense that there is absolutely no push to question, to criticize. The model is still very much about accepting and obeying, and I think that this is a very big part of the problem that we have in the country. Why it's taken us so long to explain basic facts to people. Media literacy is a major problem in the country. But the campaign over the last 3 years has certainly raised awareness about the need for this. Things have slowly started to change. It is a constant battle. It is a constant uphill struggle. But Daphne, and especially in terms of what Matthew said, Daphne's guidance, the same guidance that she gave to her children, was the guidance that she gave to Malta. She taught us how to think critically, how to question everything, not to take anything for granted. It seems fundamental, but in Malta, to understand how important that is in Malta, it's invaluable. That is part of the reason why she is missed so much. So the struggle that we faced over the last 3 years, in terms of trying to seek the truth about her assassination, trying to achieve justice for her assassination, to try to communicate to the public at large what the problems are, why it's wrong, why things should be better. I believe it's going at a glacial pace, simply because we do not have a society in Malta that can understand the fundamental points we're talking about. These should be accepted understanding in any democracy. We're having to explain these to people before we can even start to make our point. So again, the Aldo's book is so important, and I've spoken to so many people over the last few days who have ordered the book, who have really called and said it was invaluable in me trying to explain to my children what is right and what is wrong. Of course, we're doing it in a particular context, but I think the struggle for justice for Daphne is part and parcel of a broader struggle for democracy, for freedom of expression, and the only way we can really make sure that this changes in the long term is by paying attention to media literacy, paying attention to these kind of books, and teaching the children that what fundamental values in terms of what is right and wrong.
Well, in terms of the struggle, maybe Caroline, if I could ask you, and then bring in Matthew on the same point too. Could you just speak briefly about the current state of the case, of the murder investigation and everything around it, and what is needed next in terms of moving forward for justice for Daphne and addressing these broader issues in Malta?
Daphne's assassination happened as a result of the collapse of the rule of law in Malta. It was a context that enabled that to happen. The findings we have indicate it was a deal negotiated by the government that she was investigating, and it seems that she was killed for what she was about to reveal. The court cases in Malta, I mean, are an injustice in themselves, because we've had, the three people accused of planting the bomb. The case has been dragging on. We have a compilation of evidence still against the mastermind, and it's going to be at least another 3 years before that trial even starts. We have shown very clearly that there are links to the political party in government, and there are still no arrests. There are some questions. There are some cases moving forward, but we still have a government that is protecting those individuals involved. I think that this is a lesson in itself. The way forward is not easy, because you can't suddenly change a justice system that has been operating in this way for so many years, and justice delayed is in itself justice denied. So it's a struggle. It's been 3 years. While we look back, we see some progress being done, but at the end of the day, when we look forward, it should not take this long. It should not be so difficult. We should not need to fight so many challenges to make sure that justice is served. The family of Daphne Caruana Galizia from day one has been fighting for 3 years. They've not even been able to grieve, to mourn, to have some space to say, to gather themselves and say this was wrong. And we have a result, simply because of a system that is unjust. So unfortunately, the struggle that we have is about reform. It's about democratic reform, and it's taken so long, and it will require further years, because we have had to reach out to European institutions, to international organizations, including Reporters Without Borders, among others, international journalists who have really helped this case move forward. All of this has been an incredible challenge, and we're not there yet. So again, I'll say, because we keep obviously looking at the next challenge and the next result, and the long-term efforts. That's why Aldo's book is so important. The long-term efforts are really the only way to make sure that this does not happen again.
Matthew, I agree with Caroline about her comments on what your family has been through, and I have to say, your family is extraordinary, and really your fight for justice and your dedication over the past 3 years in the face of tremendous pressure and obstacles has been an inspiration for many of us. We talk a lot about what the international community can do to help, and that's the work of people like me abroad, right? But now we have hopefully a growing audience in Malta thinking about your mother's story from a different angle. What, from your family perspective, can the people in Malta do now to best support this fight for justice?
I mean, I try to think long term, and I think that the best thing would be for everyone to learn from what happened. Of course, we need some mechanisms to succeed for that to happen. For example, the public inquiry into the circumstances of the murder has to succeed, and we need people to support that. Why do we need them to support it? Not just for my family's sake or for my mother's sake, but for their own sake and for their own children's sake, so that we can all learn lessons, prevent it from happening again, allow the country to move forward. If we allow the government to get away with shutting down these mechanisms, shutting down the public inquiry, preventing wholesale reform, then we'll never be forced to learn these lessons, and that's just going to affect future generations, not just our own, in a negative way. Whereas now we're at a turning point. We have this window of opportunity where we can force the country to change in a positive way.
I want to read aloud a comment from somebody in the audience, which I think is very beautiful and powerful. This is from Sigogat. It is so important for society to interest themselves in getting to know the whole truth that is many times manipulated by people in power who only care about becoming more powerful at any cost. This book provides an amazing start to encourage the search for truth, honesty, and care for our fellow citizens. Many of us unfortunately give up searching and end up accepting the idea that we should only think about our kind. It will be excellent to find a way to continue this inspiration and never give up. And there's one question that I'll bring in as well, because we have a little bit of time left. And this is, what advice would you give to society, including our young, to fight trolls with obviously fake Facebook profiles who constantly harass anyone expressing an honest opinion? So we talked about media literacy, but we didn't talk about this other area of online abuse. Actually, Elli, if I could take this to you first, and if you've got experience more internationally on this. And I'd also like to ask Caroline about this as well, because Caroline, I know you've also, you and the Shift News have faced extensive trolling within Malta as well. So Elli, what advice would you give, especially to young people, in fighting this sort of trolling and online abuse?
I think the key thing in that question is the idea that they're fake, that the people doing this aren't real people. So the idea of being able to spot when something's genuine or not, I think that's where you need to start, rather than thinking about individual instances. How do you know when something's worth taking any notice of in the first place? So having those skills to spot when something looks authentic or when it's fake, I think that's where I'd start. I mean, the children that we work with are younger than are supposed to be on social media, so things like Facebook, although doesn't mean they're not, but they're not supposed to be on those platforms yet. So we don't deal directly with this is what you should do when you're on these platforms, but it's more about equipping them with the skills to know when to trust something and when not to.
And Caroline, would you have any advice to give to young people, particularly in Malta, from your own experiences. And I mean, we've seen at RSF as well, because this impacts the free expression climate, actually, that it's not just journalists like yourself, but anybody who can be critical, in particular in political debate. Is there anything that you would say that could help young people become, aware and resilient to these kinds of threats and trolling?
I think it's the long-term solutions that we need in terms of media literacy for people to understand fact from fiction. Malta is a particularly difficult situation because the media landscape is dominated by political party ownership. You have propaganda coming from every side. It's a particularly difficult exercise to understand what's fact and what is fiction. The trolling that happens in Malta as a result of that scenario it mostly comes from political parties, particularly the party in government, which led to the harassment of Daphne Caruana Galizia, physical and online abuse over some 30 years. So is there a solution? There is, I think, a wider debate that is needed in terms of these platforms like Facebook that take content and then take absolutely no responsibility for comments, for abuse, etc. I've said this before. I believe such platforms need to be considered as publishers, because at the moment it's a very, very convenient situation where such a powerful company with so many social media platforms takes the content and at the same time has no responsibility for the comments that are put and for the lack of fact checking, fake profiles, etc. I don't think that it should be so much effort for every individual who wants to participate in these platforms, who wants to participate in any public debate, to have to face this kind of abuse. So I would shed that responsibility onto these platforms. I think we need better international regulation on how these are managed, and then coupled with the effort and to increase awareness, to increase media literacy, to understand the tools that allow us to separate what's fact from fiction. Again, I think it's a broad effort and a long-term effort. I advice on how to deal with trolls. Everybody tells you ignore them. That's not going to solve anything. At the end of the day, you wake up every morning and there is abuse coming in. So there must be something out there, an effort made to stem this, to create the filters, to create the boundaries that do not allow this to happen. It is not fair to put this on every individual who participates on social media on different platforms, to have to take the responsibility to I'm going to ignore this. This is not to take this to assess it, to fight it. It's not fair.
We've had a question as well about where to get the book, and I'll take that to Gattaldo in a minute because I know he has a few final kind of logistical things to add. But just before I do that, do any of our panelists have any final thoughts they would like to add? Juliet.
I'd quite like to say that one of the things I love about the book is the way that it looks at Daphne's legacy spreading, because one of the things that I've always felt about this, and one of the tiny little bits of consolation in this appalling murder, is that, if this isn't too graphic an image, as they blew her apart, they actually blew all of her work out to other people who picked that up and ran with it. So in fact, by getting rid of her, they've actually multiplied what she was doing. And I think that's in a sort of political sense, obviously never in a personal sense, something to remember is that they didn't actually kill off the thing they were trying to get rid of at all. And in fact, it's going on in multiple ways as a result of what they did.
Absolutely. And that's one reason organizations like ours campaign in Daphne's case. We believe deeply that it is an emblematic case, that we can achieve justice in this case, and that will have a knock-on impact elsewhere. So not just for the protection of journalists in Malta, but in other places. And in doing so, in building this big international campaign, certainly now more people are aware of what Daphne wrote about than ever were in her lifetime. I hope that message is very clear to those in, around the world that might want to do anything like this, anything violent to silence critical voices, that it's counterproductive. It will not work. You cannot stop this message and this reporting from getting out. And so in seeking to impose costs for Daphne's murder, we're hoping as well that will have lasting consequences, that will have a lasting protective effect for others. Okay, Gattaldo, did you want to speak a bit about where people can find this? And I believe you have a video to show as well to conclude.
Yes, well, first of all, if you're in Malta, the books will be available from next Monday or they should be available from next Monday in bookshops. Do ask bookshops first. I think if you're anywhere else, you can get the book from bookshops as well, in the UK, for example, and also online on various different platforms. Just do a Google or a web search, sorry, and you'll find it. Well, no, the video that we have is a very small video. Basically, it's we got some children who read the book to be our reviewers. And I'd like to end on this with having children speak for the book. And I'd like to say, okay, well, thank you to everyone on the panel for being here. It's a great pleasure to be with you all.
I mean, I would add my thanks as well to the panelists, especially I know how busy Matthew, you and your family, and Caroline, you've been on the ground with many events to mark the anniversary yesterday. So thank you for taking the time to be here. And thank you, Gattaldo, for your beautiful book, both as a campaigner and as a mother. I think many more things are needed like this, because I think the next generation is the answer to a lot of the problems that we are facing every day. So thank you. And for the beautiful artwork as well, not just the words.
Thank you very much. And I'd also, before I forget, would like to thank the publisher Otter-Barry Books, who have published this book. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shiva, and one of the reasons why this book is so important is because of how important books were to Daphne Caruana, Galizia. Hello, my name is Ashina and I'm 9 years old. The part of the book that I remember most is at the end where there was the picture of the protesters, because it's one of the most important parts of the book. I think it's good to tell the story of Daphne in a children's book because it urges children to do what's right for the world instead of becoming a horrible person. Good, because it encouraged more people to become journalists and fight for what is right.
I think this is a great book that tells you about Daphne's life. Well, she was doing good things for the world. The bomb in her car killed her, and that's very sad. It was a horrible thing to do, and the person thought that Daphne was never going to be heard again, but now my friend has made he's made a great book about Daphne's life, and I would call this a good biography of Daphne. Oh, I love the illustrations when she was fighting the criminals. I looked at what newspaper she was writing on the illustration, and they were all very important.
The books taught her a lot of things and made it possible for her to be a journalist and to understand more what was going on in the world. Which is why, again, this book is so important. It teaches us what happened to Daphne, and that it's wrong how Daphne was silenced because she spoke the truth.